Hello and welcome to this module where we would be discussing rendering issues within the context of SEO. So for Google to access, or for any search engine to access the content of a page, it has to crawl the page. After crawling that page, it has to pass the content on the page. After passing of the content, it then has to index the content present on that page. But because of some of the difficulties that search engine crawlers have with handling of JavaScript files, they do not render all of the content before indexing. They defer the rendering and then they render at a later date and conduct what they call the second wave of indexing. So this means that any content that requires JavaScript or rendering for it to become accessible, that content will be skipped over in the first phase of indexing and will not be available to the search engine crawler. So that's what this session is really about, for us to discuss rendering issues and the impact it could have in the context of SEO. So rendering problems generally occur whenever a web page does not correctly or fully display in a web browser, right, due to various technical issues, right? And it also happens when, even if the content is displaying fully in the browser, it is not displayed fully to a search engine, especially when that search engine, like in the case with Google and Bing and many others, executes a second wave of indexing or has a limited render budget. So there are different kinds of rendering issues that could occur due to the render budget limitations that search engines and browsers sometimes have, right? And some of these are JavaScript rendering issues, some of these are CSS rendering issues, some of these are server-side rendering issues, and some of these are compatibility issues. So, and generally, the JavaScript, CSS, and compatibility stroke server-side rendering complications are the major causes of rendering problems. So some of the SEO implications are as follows. Firstly, rendering problems consume a lot of crawl budget in an inefficient way, and they slow down the rate of content discovery and content indexation, right? It also has a second order indexing effect, which means that indexing does not capture the full content on the page because rendering does not fully display all of the content on the page, or rendering problems does not make all of the content of that page available to the search engine. So in that case, the indexing is always partial. The indexing is never complete, and that can have SEO implications, because if only 8% of your content was indexed, it means that your content can only rank for 8% of its keywords. 20% of its keywords, its context, and its links would be lost to the search engines, and that will limit the search visibility of that page. So rendering issues also, especially when they occur within the browser, they lead to higher bounce rates, they lead to poor user engagement, and as we all know, it leads to lower rankings and poorer general site visibility. So how do we then detect rendering issues, since we know the kind of impact it can have on SEO? The first instrument for rendering issue detection is Google Search Console or Google Webmaster Tools. So it can give us an insight into how Google renders our page. We could also use the developer tools in the browser. We could also use third-party tools. How we can use Search Console to find rendering issues. If you have Search Console access to a page, you go to Search Console, paste that page in the search bar, or using this inspection tool, and then you view the crawled page. After viewing the crawled page, you will then test the live URL so that you can view the live page. So now let's view the crawled page here. We test the live URL, the live tests, and we can now view the tested page. Right here, we can view the crawled page. So let's view the tested page. We look at screenshots. We see if there are content gaps in those screenshots. we look at the more info, we look at JavaScript console messages, and then we look at the raw HTML. So what we want to do here is to find out if there are discrepancies between the raw HTML present in the tested page and the raw HTML present in the crawled page. And if there are discrepancies or differences, then that could be indicative of the potential for rendering or render budget issues. We could also compare and contrast the HTML that has been captured in the tested page and the raw HTML that we can find within the browser itself. Any discrepancies between both of them could also be indicative of whether or not we have rendering issues. But I know that this is a very time-consuming process, especially when you want to find rendering problems on 8 URLs, 12 URLs. It will be very time-consuming to go one by one and to start comparing and contrasting manually. So there are some tools that we can use to speed up that process, third-party tools. One of them is a Chrome extension called View Rendered Source. Once it is installed in your browser, you right-click on the page and you click on View Rendered Source. Once it is done loading, it gives us 3 columns. The first column contains the raw HTML, second column contains the rendered HTML, and the third column contains the difference between the raw and the rendered HTML. The green lines indicates lines of code that are present in the rendered version of the page but are not present in the raw version of the page. The red line indicates lines of code that are present in the raw HTML but were removed after rendering. So this extension allows us to simplify and speed up the process of detecting whether or not there are discrepancies in HTML that could be indicative of rendering problems with that page. But this is still a very time-consuming process if you have hundreds or even thousands of URLs that you want to conduct this type of technical audit for. So in the next module, we are going to be going into practicals of how you can use a Python script to observe rendering discrepancies in a scalable way. So let's dive in. I will see you in the next module.